Imagine waking up tomorrow to news that a single person has solved climate change overnight. Not through years of research or international cooperation, but through methods that scientists cannot explain. Within days, this same individual brokers peace between warring nations, crashes global poverty rates, and performs what can only be described as miracles. The world calls him a savior. Religious leaders from every faith bow before him. But what if the most beloved leader in human history was actually humanity's greatest enemy? Could you tell the difference between a miracle and a masterful deception when the fate of your soul hangs in the balance? Welcome to our channel, where we explore forbidden questions and hidden truths of history, religion, and the unknown. If you love journeys that challenge what you thought you knew, make sure to join us, because today's story may change the way you see everything. 2,000 years ago, in a cave on the Greek island of Patmos, an old man named John received the most terrifying vision in human history. Exiled by Rome for his faith, John witnessed the end of the world unfold before his eyes. Among the catastrophic events he saw was the rise of a figure so deceptive, so powerful, that even God's chosen people would be fooled. This figure would unite the world under his rule, perform impossible miracles, and demand worship as a god. The Bible calls him the Antichrist. But what if his time was not in some distant future, but right now? Chapter 1. The Ancient Prophecy. In the scorching heat of Patmos, John's weathered hands trembled as he wrote down visions that would haunt humanity for millennia. The book of Revelation painted a picture of the end times that seemed impossible to ancient minds, yet becomes more believable with each passing year. John described a charismatic leader who would rise during humanity's darkest hour, promising solutions to every problem and hope to every heart. The prophet Daniel had seen him centuries earlier, calling him a king of fierce countenance who understands dark sentences. Paul the Apostle warned the Thessalonians about the man of lawlessness, who would exalt himself above every god and sit in God's temple, proclaiming himself to be God. These weren't just warnings about a political leader or military conqueror. They described someone who would challenge the very foundation of reality itself. According to Scripture, this figure would possess supernatural abilities that would make even the most faithful question their beliefs. He would perform signs and wonders so convincing that Jesus himself warned that, if possible, even the elect would be deceived. Ancient rabbis debated whether the Antichrist would be human or demonic, Jewish or Gentile, but they all agreed on one thing. When he appeared, the world would never be the same. The early church fathers like Augustine and Jerome studied these prophecies intensely, trying to understand how someone could gain control over every nation, tribe, and tongue. How could one person monitor every financial transaction on earth? How could he force every human to receive a mark without which they could not buy or sell? To ancient minds, these seemed like impossible fantasies. Today, they sound like a technology conference. What made these prophecies even more chilling was their precision about human nature. The Antichrist would not conquer through force alone, but through deception so complete that people would willingly surrender their freedom. He would offer them exactly what they wanted most: peace, prosperity, and purpose. In return, he would ask for something that seemed so small at first, just a simple mark of loyalty, a digital identifier, a sign of global citizenship. Chapter 2. Signs of the Times. For 2,000 years, Christians have watched for the signs that would announce the Antichrist's arrival. wars and rumors of wars, famines and earthquakes, the love of many growing cold, these harbingers of the end times have appeared throughout history. But never before have all the conditions existed simultaneously for the biblical prophecies to be fulfilled exactly as written. The technology for global surveillance now exists in every pocket. Smartphones track our every movement, social media monitors our every thought, and digital payments record our every purchase. The infrastructure for a mark of the beast system is already in place, waiting only for the right crisis and the right leader to implement it. China's social credit system offers a preview of how quickly freedom can disappear when technology meets authoritarian control. Religious unity movements that would have been impossible in previous centuries now flourish in our connected world. The Parliament of World Religions brings together faiths that once considered each other heretical, all in search of common ground. Pope Francis meets with Islamic leaders, Buddhist monks dialogue with Christian theologians, and New Age spirituality blends traditions that were once distinct. This ecumenical spirit creates the perfect environment for a leader who can appeal to all faiths while belonging to none. Perhaps most importantly, the nation of Israel exists again in its ancient homeland, exactly as prophesied. Jerusalem stands as the spiritual center of three major religions, making it the perfect stage for the Antichrist's ultimate blasphemy. Plans for rebuilding the temple move forward, awaiting only the political will and religious consensus to begin construction. Every piece of the end times puzzle has found its place. The global challenges facing humanity today, climate change, economic inequality, international conflict, and pandemic disease, create the desperate conditions in which people willingly trade freedom for security. History shows that populations will accept almost any level of control if they believe it will protect them from existential threats. A leader who could solve these problems would be welcomed as humanity's savior, regardless of the cost. Chapter 3: The Emergence. In our hypothetical scenario, the year is 2029. The world teeters on the brink of collapse as multiple crises converge into a perfect storm of desperation. Climate disasters have displaced millions. Economic systems strain under unprecedented debt, and international conflicts threaten to spiral into global war. Into this chaos steps a figure unlike any the world has ever seen. He emerges not from traditional political channels, but from the intersection of technology, spirituality, and humanitarian work. His background remains mysteriously vague. Some say he was born in Europe, others claim the Middle East, still others insist on Asia. Official records seem incomplete, as if he appeared fully formed into public consciousness without the messy details of childhood or family connections. His first public appearance occurs during a natural disaster that threatens millions of lives. As rescue efforts fail and governments prove inadequate, this unknown figure somehow organizes relief operations that defy explanation. Supplies appear where none existed, coordination emerges from chaos, and survivors report experiences that sound more like miracles than logistics. International media struggles to explain how one person could accomplish what entire nations could not. Within weeks, world leaders who have spent decades in conflict find themselves agreeing to his proposals for peace. His negotiation methods remain unclear, but results speak louder than process. Ancient enemies lay down arms, trade disputes resolve overnight, and international cooperation reaches levels not seen since the aftermath of World War II. Critics who question his methods find their arguments drowned out by the chorus of global praise. The most unsettling aspect of his rise is how natural it feels. Unlike traditional demagogues who divide populations, he seems to unite them. Religious leaders from every faith claim he represents their highest ideals. Scientists praise his innovative approaches to seemingly impossible problems. Even skeptics admit they cannot find fault with his results, only with their inability to understand his methods. Chapter 4. The Great Deception begins. By year 2 of his global influence, the world leader has accomplished feats that reshape humanity's understanding of what is possible. Climate change, the seemingly intractable challenge that has stymied governments for decades, begins reversing at an unprecedented pace. Ocean levels stabilize, extreme weather patterns moderate, and atmospheric conditions improve in ways that contradict every scientific model. Environmental scientists struggle to explain the changes. The leader's proposed solutions seemed modest: new technologies for carbon capture, innovative renewable energy systems, and international cooperation agreements. Yet the results far exceed what these measures should theoretically achieve. Satellite data shows changes occurring too rapidly for natural processes, leading some to whisper about intervention beyond human capability. Economic transformation follows environmental healing. The leader introduces a new financial system that eliminates poverty not through redistribution, but through what he calls abundance creation. Unemployment disappears as new industries emerge seemingly overnight. Currency fluctuations stabilize, and international trade reaches unprecedented levels of cooperation and prosperity. Economists admit they cannot explain the mechanisms behind these changes, but cannot argue with the results. Most remarkably, the leader demonstrates abilities that blur the line between advanced technology and supernatural power. During public appearances, he seems to know personal details about individuals in crowds of thousands. Medical conditions heal in his presence, leading some to claim miraculous intervention, while others insist on advanced medical technology operating beyond current understanding. Videos of these events spread globally, yet somehow never capture the moments of healing clearly enough to provide definitive proof. Religious leaders across all faiths begin interpreting these events through their own theological frameworks. Christians see fulfillment of prophecies about God working through chosen vessels. Muslims speak of divine intervention through a righteous leader. Hindus reference ancient predictions about avatars appearing during times of crisis. Buddhist teachers discuss the arrival of an enlightened being capable of alleviating suffering on a global scale. Chapter 5. The Point of No Return. 3.5 years into his reign of unprecedented global prosperity and peace, the world leader makes an announcement that changes everything. Standing in the newly completed Third Temple in Jerusalem, a construction project that somehow united Jewish, Christian, and Islamic authorities in support, he declares that the time for humanity's next evolutionary step has arrived. His words, broadcast simultaneously in every language through translation technology that operates with impossible accuracy, cut through centuries of religious division with surgical precision. He speaks of humanity's need to transcend old limitations, to embrace new forms of consciousness, and to accept guidance from sources beyond traditional understanding. What begins as inspirational rhetoric gradually shifts into something far more demanding. The leader reveals a new identification system that will replace all previous forms of documentation, currency, and access control. This mark, he explains, represents more than mere convenience. It signifies humanity's commitment to unity, progress, and shared destiny. The technology behind it remains mysterious, but its effects are immediate and comprehensive. Those who receive the mark gain access to unprecedented prosperity, health benefits, and social privileges. Resistance emerges immediately, but not from expected sources. Traditional political opposition seems strangely muted, with even former critics expressing reluctant admiration for the leader's achievements. Instead, dissent comes from religious communities that recognize the prophetic implications of these developments. Orthodox Christians, traditional Muslims, observant Jews, and various other faith communities begin organizing underground networks of resistance. The leader's response to religious opposition reveals the iron fist beneath the velvet glove. Those who refuse the mark find themselves increasingly isolated from society. Employment becomes impossible, financial transactions are blocked, and even basic necessities like food and shelter require the new identification system. What began as voluntary participation quickly transforms into mandatory compliance for anyone wishing to participate in human civilization. Chapter 6: Christianity in Crisis. The Christian Church faces its greatest crisis since the Roman persecutions as believers confront an impossible choice between faith and survival. Denominational lines that seemed important for centuries become meaningless in the face of this ultimate test. Churches split, not along theological lines, but along the fundamental question of whether to accept or reject the leader's authority. Many mainstream denominations embrace what they call evolutionary Christianity, arguing that God works through human progress and that resisting beneficial change demonstrates a lack of faith. Seminary professors develop sophisticated theological arguments explaining how the leader represents divine intervention in human history. These churches incorporate the new worship practices, receive the mark, and maintain their buildings, congregations, and social respectability. However, a significant minority of Christians recognizes the prophetic implications and chooses underground resistance. These believers abandon church buildings, formal organizations, and public worship in favor of secret gatherings in homes, forests, and hidden locations. They develop coded communication systems, establish networks for sharing resources, and create new forms of Christian community that can survive under persecution. The psychological pressure on believers becomes intense as former friends, family members, and spiritual leaders embrace the new system while condemning resistance as stubborn fundamentalism. Children are separated from parents who refuse the mark, spouses divorce over disagreements about compliance, and lifelong friendships shatter over theological differences that suddenly carry life or death implications. Underground Christians develop new understanding of biblical passages about endurance, persecution, and faith under pressure. Stories of miraculous provision for believers who refuse the mark begin circulating through secret networks. Reports of supernatural protection, unexpected food supplies, and divine guidance in avoiding capture provide hope for communities living in constant danger. Chapter 7: Islamic Response and Division. The Islamic world grapples with theological questions that cut to the heart of eschatological beliefs as scholars debate whether the leader represents the long-awaited Mahdi or the feared Dajjal. Traditional Islamic prophecies describe both figures in terms that could apply to the current situation, creating profound division within the global Muslim community. Many Islamic leaders initially embrace the leader's message of unity, peace, and social justice, values that align closely with Quranic principles. His ability to bring prosperity to traditionally marginalized communities and his respectful approach to Islamic customs win support from moderate Muslims who see him as divinely guided. Major Islamic institutions issue declarations supporting cooperation with his global initiatives. However, traditional scholars point to prophetic warnings about the Dajjal's ability to deceive even believers through impressive displays of power and apparent righteousness. They note that Islamic tradition describes the Dajjal as initially appearing beneficial before revealing his true nature through demands for worship. These scholars organize resistance movements that mirror Christian underground networks, creating interfaith cooperation in unexpected circumstances. The division becomes particularly acute when the leader begins demanding forms of reverence that approach worship. Islamic theology's absolute prohibition against associating partners with Allah creates an unbridgeable gap between compliance and faith for observant Muslims. Those who refuse find themselves facing the same persecution as Christian resistors, leading to practical alliances between religious communities that have historically been antagonistic. Sufi mystics report visions and spiritual experiences that they interpret as warnings about the leader's true nature, while rationalist Islamic scholars struggle to reconcile their religious beliefs with the undeniable benefits of his policies. The result is a fractured Islamic world where theological positions carry immediate practical consequences for survival and social acceptance. Chapter 8: Jewish Theological Upheaval. The Jewish response to the leader creates the most complex theological situation, as his initial support for Jewish restoration gives way to demands that violate the most fundamental principles of monotheistic faith. The rebuilding of the temple, a dream cherished for 2,000 years, becomes a nightmare when the leader declares himself God within its sacred walls. Orthodox Jewish communities had initially celebrated the leader's support for Jewish interests. His intervention in international conflicts that threatened Israel, his facilitation of temple reconstruction, and his apparent respect for Jewish law created unprecedented optimism about the possibility of messianic redemption. Many Orthodox rabbis privately wondered whether he might be the Mashiach, despite his non-Jewish origins. Reform and conservative Jewish movements found even more to admire in his progressive social policies, environmental activism, and commitment to international cooperation. His message of human unity and technological progress aligned closely with liberal Jewish values about repairing the world through social action. These communities enthusiastically embraced his leadership as representing the best of humanistic Judaism applied on a global scale. The moment of revelation in the temple creates an immediate and decisive break. Orthodox Jews recognize the abomination of desolation prophesied in Daniel and immediately organize resistance movements. Their deep knowledge of biblical prophecy helps them prepare for persecution that Reform Jews, caught off guard by this theological turn, struggle to understand or respond to effectively. Jewish resistance networks become some of the most effective underground organizations, drawing on centuries of experience surviving persecution and maintaining community identity under hostile conditions. Their understanding of biblical prophecy provides strategic advantages in anticipating the leader's next moves, while their global connections facilitate communication and resource sharing among resistance movements worldwide.
Chapter 9: Eastern Religions and the New Order.
Hindu, Buddhist, and other Eastern religious traditions face unique challenges in interpreting a Western leader claiming divine authority, yet their theological frameworks provide some concepts that make acceptance easier than in monotheistic traditions. The Hindu concept of avatar allows for divine incarnation in human form, while Buddhist ideas about enlightened beings capable of alleviating suffering provide alternative interpretations of the leader's abilities. Many Hindu teachers embrace the leader as representing a new avatar appropriate for the modern age, arguing that divine consciousness can manifest through any cultural background when humanity faces existential crisis. His demonstrated abilities align with traditional descriptions of avatar powers, while his global influence suggests the cosmic significance that Hindu prophecies associate with divine intervention in human history. Buddhist responses vary significantly between traditional and modernized forms of the religion. Traditional Buddhists, particularly in Thailand, Myanmar, and Sri Lanka, approach the leader with caution, referencing Buddha's warnings about false teachers who perform miracles to deceive followers. However, Western Buddhist converts and modernized Asian Buddhists often interpret his message as compatible with Buddhist principles of compassion and enlightenment. New Age spirituality movements enthusiastically embrace the leader as representing the long-anticipated shift in human consciousness that they have been predicting for decades. His message of unity, transformation, and transcendence fits perfectly with New Age beliefs about humanity's spiritual evolution. These movements become some of his most effective promoters, translating his message into spiritual language that appeals to seekers dissatisfied with traditional religion. The result is a complex religious landscape where Eastern traditions generally show more flexibility in accepting the leader than Western monotheistic religions, creating new forms of spiritual authority that blend ancient wisdom traditions with contemporary global governance. This religious syncretism becomes a powerful tool for legitimizing the leader's authority among populations seeking spiritual meaning in an increasingly secular world. Chapter 10: The Global Religious War. As religious divisions solidify around acceptance or rejection of the leader's authority, underground resistance movements develop sophisticated networks that span traditional theological boundaries. Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and even some Hindu and Buddhist resistors find themselves cooperating in ways that would have been impossible under normal circumstances. These interfaith resistance networks operate through coded communications that blend religious language from multiple traditions, making their messages nearly incomprehensible to surveillance systems designed to monitor single-faith communities. A Christian safe house might receive advance warning of raids through Buddhist meditation networks, while Jewish scholars provide biblical interpretation that helps Muslim resistors understand prophetic timing. The underground economy that emerges to support resistors creates parallel systems for food distribution, medical care, education, and even employment that operate entirely outside the marked system. These networks demonstrate levels of cooperation and efficiency that surprise even their participants, leading many to interpret their effectiveness as evidence of divine intervention in human organization. Government response to religious resistance escalates from bureaucratic pressure to active persecution as the leader's true nature becomes more apparent. Resistance members face imprisonment, torture, and execution, yet the movements continue growing as more people recognize the spiritual implications of the choice between the mark and faith. Reports of supernatural protection for resistors begin spreading through both underground networks and official media. The psychological warfare becomes as intense as physical persecution, with marked family members pressured to inform on resistant relatives, children taught to report parents who maintain illegal religious practices, and former believers enlisted to infiltrate resistance networks. The resulting social fragmentation creates communities where trust becomes a life or death decision, and faith requires courage that most people discover they possess only when tested. Chapter 11. The Lost Gospels Revealed. Archaeological discoveries begin surfacing with suspicious timing as ancient manuscripts emerge that seem to validate the leader's claims about his divine nature and humanity's need for evolutionary transformation. These texts, supposedly hidden for centuries in remote locations, contain teachings attributed to Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, and other religious founders that align perfectly with the leader's message. The Gospel of Divine Unity describes Jesus teaching his disciples about future avatars who would complete his mission of human transformation. The hidden sayings of Muhammad reveal prophecies about a final messenger who would unite all religions under divine authority. Buddhist texts supposedly found in Tibetan monasteries speak of an enlightened being who would appear during humanity's darkest hour to guide the species toward transcendence. Biblical scholars face an impossible task as they attempt to authenticate these discoveries under intense public pressure to validate their contents. Traditional authentication methods prove inadequate when the stakes are so high and the implications so immediate. Carbon dating suggests appropriate ages for the manuscripts, yet the theology seems remarkably suited to contemporary circumstances. Some scholars suspect sophisticated forgery using advanced technology to create artificial aging, while others argue that the consistent message across multiple traditions suggests genuine divine revelation being unveiled at the prophetically appropriate time. The debate becomes academic when public opinion overwhelmingly accepts the texts as validation of the leader's authority, regardless of scholarly consensus about their authenticity. The psychological impact of these discoveries on resistant believers proves devastating, as documents supposedly written by their most revered teachers appear to contradict everything they understood about their faith. Underground religious networks struggle with members who begin questioning whether resistance might actually represent rebellion against divine will rather than faithfulness to it. Chapter 12. The Book of Enoch Connection. Ancient texts like the Book of Enoch gain new relevance as supernatural phenomena increase around the world leaders' activities. Enoch's detailed descriptions of fallen angels, their offspring called Nephilim, and their role in corrupting human civilization provide a framework for understanding events that transcend normal human capabilities. Religious scholars note striking parallels between Enoch's prophecies about the end times and current events surrounding the leader's rise. The text describes a figure who will deceive humanity through displays of power and knowledge, leading them away from divine truth through promises of transformation and evolution. Enoch's warnings about false miracles and lying wonders seem particularly relevant to unexplained phenomena surrounding the leader. Theories emerge about the leader's possible connection to Nephilim bloodlines, drawing on Enoch's descriptions of giants who possessed supernatural abilities and sought to elevate themselves above human limitations. Some researchers point to genetic anomalies that might explain his extraordinary capabilities, while others suggest direct demonic influence rather than inherited characteristics. The book's descriptions of advanced technology, possessed by antediluvian civilizations, fuels speculation about whether the leader has access to knowledge preserved from before the flood. His technological innovations seem to exceed normal human discovery processes, leading some to wonder whether he draws on sources of information that transcend conventional research and development. Enoch's emphasis on the importance of remaining faithful to divine truth during times of widespread deception provides encouragement for resistance movements, while his detailed descriptions of judgment and restoration offer hope that current suffering serves a larger purpose in divine justice. Underground believers study Enochian prophecy with new intensity as they seek understanding of their role in end times events. Chapter 13. The Dead Sea Scrolls. Warning. Previously overlooked passages in the Dead Sea Scrolls emerge as remarkably relevant to current events, as if the Essene community preserved warnings specifically intended for the end times. The War Scrolls' descriptions of final battles between light and darkness take on new meaning when applied to spiritual conflict surrounding the leader's demands for worship. The community rule's emphasis on separation from corrupted society resonates with resistance movements that find themselves forced underground to maintain their faith. Essene practices of communal living, resource sharing, and mutual support provide practical models for communities that must survive outside the marked economic system. Scholarly analysis reveals that the Essenes expected exactly this type of end-time scenario, where a false messiah would deceive the majority while a faithful remnant preserved true worship in hidden communities. Their detailed preparations for surviving persecution during the final tribulation offer valuable guidance for modern resistors facing similar challenges. The scroll's descriptions of supernatural warfare between angelic and demonic forces help resistance communities understand the spiritual dimensions of their struggle. References to divine protection for the faithful during times of unprecedented testing provide hope for believers facing seemingly impossible odds against overwhelming technological and political power. Essene prophecies about the restoration that follows the final conflict offer long-term perspective on current suffering, suggesting that resistance serves a cosmic purpose in preserving divine truth through humanity's darkest hour. These ancient communities apparently understood that faithfulness during the end times would require sacrifice beyond anything previously demanded of believers. Chapter 14. Cross-religious prophecies align. Startling similarities emerge between end times prophecies from diverse religious traditions, creating either validation of universal warning about deception or confirmation that the leader represents authentic divine intervention working through multiple cultural frameworks. Native American prophecies about the Great Purification describe circumstances remarkably similar to current global events. Hopi traditions speak of a time when humanity must choose between technology that destroys and wisdom that preserves, when a false leader will promise solutions while leading people away from harmony with natural law. These prophecies describe environmental healing, followed by spiritual corruption, matching the sequence of events in the leader's rise to power. Hindu predictions about the end of Kali Yuga describe a period of maximum deception before divine intervention restores Dharma through the Kalki avatar. Some Hindu teachers interpret the leader as representing Kalki, while others see him as the final manifestation of Kali Yuga's corruption before the real avatar arrives to establish divine rule. Zoroastrian influences on monotheistic end times beliefs become apparent as scholars trace common themes about light versus darkness, truth versus falsehood, and the final choice that determines individual destiny. These ancient Persian concepts seem to provide the theological foundation for later Jewish, Christian, and Islamic eschatology. The convergence of prophetic traditions creates either powerful evidence for universal divine warning or sophisticated manipulation of religious beliefs to legitimize political control. Resistance communities debate whether cross-cultural prophecy validates their faith or represents evidence of long-term planning by forces seeking to manipulate religious populations through their deepest beliefs. Chapter 15: The Vatican's Secret Archives. The Catholic Church's response to end-times events reveals carefully prepared protocols developed over centuries of expecting exactly this type of crisis. Secret documents outline procedures for maintaining papal authority during the reign of Antichrist, protecting sacred relics and documents, and preserving apostolic succession when normal church operations become impossible. The third secret of Fatima, finally revealed in full, describes events matching current circumstances with unsettling accuracy. The vision speaks of a bishop clothed in white, who falls while climbing a mountain of crosses, interpreted by some as referring to papal martyrdom during end-times persecution of Christians who refuse to compromise with false authority. St. Malachi's prophecies about the final popes take on new relevance as the current pontiff's response to the world leader appears to fulfill ancient predictions about papal behavior during the end times. The prophecy's description of Peter the Roman, who will feed his flock amid many tribulations, suggests either betrayal or heroic resistance, depending on interpretation. Jesuit scholars reveal centuries of preparation for theological challenges that would arise when supernatural phenomena exceed normal explanation. Their training in spiritual discernment becomes crucial as the Church attempts to distinguish between authentic miracles and demonic deception in an environment where both seem possible. Vatican archives contain correspondence between popes spanning centuries, revealing awareness that the Church would face its ultimate test in the form of a leader who could perform apparent miracles while demanding worship that violates Christian doctrine. These documents suggest that Church leadership understood their responsibility to preserve faith, even when doing so meant abandoning temporal power and social acceptance. Chapter 16: Digital Surveillance and the Mark. Modern technology enables the biblical Mark of the Beast system through integration of digital identity, financial transactions, and behavioral monitoring that creates unprecedented control over human activity. Blockchain technology provides the infrastructure for tracking every exchange of goods or services, while preventing traditional forms of commerce outside the system. Social credit systems pioneered in authoritarian nations demonstrate how quickly populations adapt to behavioral modification when essential services depend on compliance scores. The leader's global implementation expands these concepts to include religious observance, political loyalty, and social cooperation, measured through constant digital monitoring. Cryptocurrency eliminates cash transactions that might allow underground economies to function independently of marked systems. Digital wallets, linked to biometric identification, ensure that every economic activity requires authentication through the mark, making survival outside the system virtually impossible without extensive underground networks. Biometric identification technology, integrated into the mark system, creates foolproof identity verification that prevents traditional forms of document forgery or identity theft that might allow resistors to participate in normal commerce. Facial recognition, fingerprint scanning, and even DNA analysis ensure that individuals cannot evade identification. The Internet of Things enables monitoring of human activity through everyday objects that report behavior patterns to central databases. Smart homes, connected vehicles, and wearable devices create comprehensive surveillance that makes privacy impossible and resistance extremely dangerous, even in apparently private spaces. Chapter 17: Artificial Intelligence and False Miracles. Advanced artificial intelligence provides potential explanation for supernatural phenomena surrounding the leader's rise, as AI systems exceed human cognitive abilities and simulate miraculous intervention through sophisticated environmental manipulation. Machine learning algorithms analyze global patterns to predict and influence events with apparent omniscience. Holographic technology creates visual experiences indistinguishable from physical reality, enabling mass deception through apparent miracles witnessed by thousands of people simultaneously. Three-dimensional projections can simulate divine appearances, angelic visitations, and other supernatural events that reinforce belief in the leader's divine authority. Quantum computing enables processing power that approaches omniscience within limited domains, allowing prediction and manipulation of complex systems that appear miraculous to human observation. Weather modification, economic manipulation, and social engineering become possible at scales that simulate divine intervention in human affairs. Neural interface technology offers the possibility of direct mental influence over human consciousness, explaining reports of telepathic communication and mind reading associated with the leader's public appearances. Brain-computer interfaces could enable manipulation of thoughts and emotions that creates authentic religious experiences while serving deceptive purposes. The question becomes whether advanced technology explains all supernatural phenomena, or whether genuine spiritual forces operate through technological means to accomplish prophetic purposes. Resistance communities struggle with discernment issues when both explanations seem possible and the practical implications remain identical regardless of the source. Chapter 18: Geopolitical Realignment. Global governance structures transform as traditional nation-states surrender sovereignty to international authority under the leader's guidance, fulfilling biblical prophecies about world government while creating resistance movements that align with end-times descriptions of faithful remnants opposing global control. The United Nations evolves into actual world government with enforcement capabilities that supersede national militaries, courts, and legislative bodies. International law becomes directly applicable to individual citizens, rather than requiring implementation through national governments, creating uniform global legal standards that prioritize unity over local autonomy. Major powers, including the United States, China, and Russia, initially resist global integration before eventually accepting subordinate roles in the new system. Economic pressure, international isolation, and domestic unrest force compliance even from nations with strong traditions of independence and military capability. Middle Eastern conflicts intensify as the leaders' demands for worship in Jerusalem trigger responses from traditional religious authorities who recognize the prophetic implications. The stage sets for battles described in biblical prophecy as ancient enemies unite against common spiritual threats, while political alliances shift based on religious rather than national interests. Military technology advances to levels that make conventional warfare obsolete, while creating new forms of conflict based on information warfare, economic manipulation, and social control. The potential for global destruction becomes so overwhelming that resistance movements must operate entirely through underground methods that avoid direct military confrontation. Chapter 19: The Soul's Ultimate Test. In this hypothetical scenario, every human being faces the ultimate spiritual decision that reveals the true nature of their relationship with divine truth versus temporal comfort. The choice between receiving the mark and maintaining faith becomes a test that strips away all pretense and forces individuals to confront their deepest beliefs about reality. The psychology of mass deception demonstrates how easily human beings abandon principles when social pressure and material necessity create impossible choices between survival and integrity. Families divide as members make different decisions about compliance, creating personal tragedies that mirror the cosmic conflict between truth and falsehood. Individual faith decisions under extreme pressure reveal character traits that surprise even the people making them. Some individuals expected to remain faithful compromise immediately when faced with real consequences, while others who seemed weak demonstrate unexpected courage when tested. The crisis reveals authentic spiritual commitment versus social conformity. Underground communities develop new understanding of martyrdom as members face death rather than compromise fundamental beliefs about divine authority. The willingness to sacrifice life rather than betray faith becomes a powerful witness that influences others to reconsider their own choices about compliance with demands they recognize as spiritually destructive. The question of salvation during tribulation creates theological debates about whether God's grace remains available to those who initially accept the mark before recognizing their error. Resistance communities struggle with questions about forgiveness, redemption, and the possibility of escape from choices that seem to determine eternal destiny. Chapter 20: The Return. As the leader's 3.5-year reign reaches its climax, global conflict erupts as resistance movements unite against his authority, while marked populations face supernatural disasters that their technology cannot prevent or explain. The Battle of Armageddon begins not as military conquest, but as spiritual warfare that manifests in physical reality. Unexpected intervention occurs just as humanity approaches complete destruction through conflicts that threaten the planet's ability to sustain life. The intervention comes not from human sources, but from spiritual authority that supersedes both the leader's power and human military capability, demonstrating that ultimate reality transcends technological manipulation. The true identity of both the deceiver and the authentic divine authority becomes clear through events that resolve all theological debates about the leader's nature and origin. His supernatural abilities are revealed as genuine, but derived from sources opposed to divine truth rather than aligned with it, explaining both his power and his ultimate limitations. Underground believers who maintained faith through impossible circumstances witness vindication of their resistance as divine justice addresses the deception that ensnared most of humanity. Their suffering is revealed to have served cosmic purposes in preserving truth during humanity's darkest hour and preparing them for roles in restoration. The shocking conclusion challenges assumptions about the nature of good and evil, divine justice and mercy, and the ultimate purpose of human existence. Events that seem to demonstrate the triumph of deception over truth are revealed as necessary tests that separate authentic faith from mere social conformity, preparing humanity for transformation beyond current imagination. But as the dust settles and new realities emerge, one question haunts everyone who lived through these events. If deception could be so complete and so convincing that even miracles became tools of falsehood, how can we ever be certain about what we believe? And in our own time, as technology advances and global crises multiply, are we already living through the early stages of this ultimate test without recognizing it? The answer may depend not on our ability to predict the future, but on our willingness to examine our own hearts and ask the most dangerous question of all. What would it take for us to abandon what we claim to believe? Because in the end, that may be the only question that really matters.